Valheim's release inflated the game's community more than Yugoslavia back in '92. The game quickly skyrocketed from 1 million players all the way up to 5 million copies sold. And it's quite obvious why. In a world where games nowadays are made more for profit than for the consumer, Valheim sticks out as not just being a game made with love, but a game made with
hot, sweet, sweaty passion.
For a game released in early access and as of right now still in early access, this game feels more done and finished than some games that are out of early access.
I'm looking at you, Ark Survival Evolved!
As such, this game has only had a single big update, and the game is far from being complete. So, as time goes on, this review may be out of date, but as of right now, I see no way the devs could ruin this masterpiece. Before I talk about it though, I would love to hear your guys' experiences and opinions on this game, so go drop them down below and I'll respond to as many as I can. If you're okay with, into, or can ignore the pixelated graphics, this game is incredible with how it looks. From peaceful meadows to the roaring oceans, Valheim looks incredibly well done with its shaders. The ocean looks and feels similar to Sea of Thieves. No matter the biome you're in, you can't help but stop and stare at the beautiful landscape. Even at night or in the darker weathers, the game never stops to wow your eyes with its beauty, and that's not the easiest thing to do for a pixel game. If you compare this game's graphics to others, it's easily one of the prettiest out there, which is pretty impressive when it's being compared to titans of the survival genre like Rust, Ark, and even Minecraft. Typically when a game is being showcased, they will only use bright, sunny skylighting to showcase the game as best as possible. But that's just not needed for Valheim. Whether in the sunny meadows, crossing the treacherous oceans, hiking the snowy mountains, or even traversing the burning hellscape, Valheim's beauty never ceases to amaze you no matter where you go. Every biome, spot of land and sea feels personally loved by the devs, as there isn't a single area I can say doesn't look good. Even in the unfinished biome of the Mistlands, the empty, dark area gives off a creepy and unsettling feeling even though no enemies spawn here yet since it isn't finished. Even though the game is completely procedurally generated, the game never ceases to amaze your eyes with its pretty, dark, cold, or unsettling atmospheres that each individual area gives off perfectly. For a game that is completely random to every player that plays it, it feels like the devs personally craft your world, but they don't. It's completely random. The combat in Valheim is really good, but it can also be a hit or miss. Compared to most other games, the combat is very basic. You have a swing, a block, and you can dodge. If you time the block, you can parry, but that's really it. A few weapons do try to expand upon this with unique playstyles like throwing the spear.
One day you will have to answer for your actions, and God may not be so merciful.
Or, of course, shooting your bow.
I'm joking! Stop!
But for the most part, combat doesn't have a ton of variation. That being said, it doesn't need to have variation. The basic combat that it currently has is rather fun, and if you made it more complex, you'd risk ruining the already fun mechanics of parrying, doing massive damage, and then dodging out of the way. The only really bad thing about the combat is your stamina meter, as once you use it all up, it slowly comes back and you go from having fun parrying locking enemies into dodging attacks waiting for your stamina to go back up. It's not the biggest deal in the world, but it does get annoying when fighting some of the tankier enemies in the game. Oh, and bows are super broken. I'm not kidding, with the exception of one boss, you can cheese every enemy in the game by just running away and poking it with a bow. I'm not super sure what the counter to this would be. Some enemies have bows or ranged attacks, but even then you can dodge them pretty easily and the enemies don't really have a dodge. Maybe add a damage drop off to the bow to make it weaker at really long range. That's really the only idea I could come up with. But besides that, combat feels insanely good. The only issue is, like I said, bows are a little wonk.
The animatronic characters here do get a bit quirky.
The movement in Valheim isn't super in-depth. You walk or run, that's really it. The game does have taming mechanics in place, so maybe at some point they'll add horses or some such mount into the game to give better land traversal. But for the most part, the only thing you can get to help with movement is a cart that honestly sucks. gets caught on almost everything on the ground pretty easily, and it can take damage. If you let go, it will roll down hills. It's honestly better used as a bigger chest back at home, since its actual usefulness as a cart isn't that good unless you have paved roads to walk on, which personally I never really did. Maybe you paved a path all the way to your mining operations to get copper. I wouldn't. However, movement on land is very basic, but movement within the seas is tremendous. The ocean was once a huge part of Nordic culture, and as such, Valheim needed to pay extra attention to its oceans. There are 3 boats in the game. A dinky raft that I do not suggest making at all, since it's honestly a waste of resources. The car, which is a semi-competent ship. If you're making a ship to traverse the oceans, this is probably the first one you'll be using. It's not the fastest form of travel, but it will get you from point A to point B. As long as you don't stray too far into the oceans, you should be fine to not get capsized. Just be careful of getting too close to dangerous areas, as enemies will come to attack you if you're near the shore. It also has a small compartment for gear or loot you can't carry, which can be very useful if you're sailing away to get metal and bring it back. Lastly, there's the longship, which is much faster, has more health, and is overall just the better option for traversing the deep oceans. In proper Viking fashion, the oceans are anything but safe, and I wouldn't suggest risking them in the smaller ships, although you will typically be safe nonetheless, because as of right now, the oceans aren't terribly difficult or daunting. There are enemies that spawn in it, but they don't spawn super commonly, so you're typically safe. There are also portals in the game, but you can't really transport metal through them, so they're not super useful, but you can transport gear and such, so you can go to an area, build up a base that can smelt the ore that you need, and then bring that back home and upgrade it home. The only issue is in order to get the upgrades back at home, you do have to take some of the ore back, which means you'll have to sail it all back, and this is a pain, and this is probably one of the few issues I actually have with the game. There are mods to fix this, or just remove the feature of not being able to transport metal through portals entirely, although that is cheating. Either way, it's one of my few nitpicking little annoyances with this game, but there aren't really that many to it. The game feels really well done, and as such, the few issues I do have I will highlight, but they don't really take away enough from the game. All the biomes, as I said earlier, are very pretty, with the exception of the annoying swamp level. Why does every game need an annoying swamp level? Each of the biomes are both challenging to learn, but easy to master. The first 2, Meadows and Black Forest, are pretty easy to navigate through with pretty much the same enemies, Greylings, Grey Dwarfs. Black Forests also have the occasional troll, which, believe it or not, is one of the strongest enemies in the game and can go toe to toe with the enemies in the final biome. A difficulty spike then occurs when you enter the swamp, as the enemies here are much more vast, with skeletons, draugr, both which can have arrows, slimes, wraiths, leeches, and even surtling, which are these fire demons that throw fireballs at you. But you're in a wet swamp, so they're not exactly the most deadly of enemies. This new influx of enemies you haven't seen before makes this biome much harder to get used to. Although you did run into skeletons in the previous biome, everything else is brand new, and the wraiths are very rare spawns, so your first time going up against one is sure to scare the player into dying, even though once you understand them, they're pretty easy to kill. The rest of the biomes also somewhat have this, but not nearly to the degree that the swamp does. Each time you enter a new biome, you're assaulted with new enemies that have different attack patterns, higher health, and higher damage, and you better pray to God you don't accidentally enter a biome you're not prepared for yet. I once accidentally docked at a plains biome while I was still in the Black Forest part of the game, since from far away it looked like a meadows, and when it said plains I was curious where I was until I got one shot by a mosquito. Without proper preparation, the biomes are merciless and will always end in your death, but with preparing properly you can enter a new area and learn the enemies correctly, and that's where this game excels. Building in Valheim is pretty basic. They did just release a new update that adds a few more buildable items, but overall it's not super intuitively deep yet. That being said, it's very easy to make pretty looking houses, huts, and formidable looking gates. Later in the game you unlock the ability to build with stone, and although it is super expensive, it allows you to make strong looking castles and walls to protect your bases from monsters. Another thing about building is, once you have an established base, you can sometimes be assaulted by mobs depending on how far you are in the game, with different mobs attacking depending on which bosses you have killed. So as nice as your nice little hut is, you do need to set up some defenses. My first time playing I had a nice little pig farm which got attacked by trolls, and they one-shot the pig farm, and now all my pigs exploded and went loose across the entire meadows, and I kinda gave up on keeping pigs after that. This game could benefit from a lock-on building system like what Ark has. I'm sorry that I have to give kudos to Ark, but it is nice. Again though, it's not difficult to build and it is fine in its current state. Maybe give us more features for building, but that's really it. Here's a little spoiler warning. I'm going to be talking about each of the bosses, so if you haven't progressed deep enough in the game or you don't want to be spoiled on certain aspects, here's a timestamp to skip to. I'm talking to you, Brendan. All the bosses in Valheim are fun and pretty challenging, with the exception of the first boss, Eikthyr, who I have killed with nothing but a club before, which is still a good boss since he's the introduction to bosses, and is there just to teach you the basics. Each boss also perfectly fits the biome in which they come from, as Eikthyr is an easy boss that is in the most peaceful biome, and he is a deer which exemplifies the land he comes from. Like I said, he's an introduction to the game and bosses and is there to teach you the basics, which is what the Meadows is entirely for. The Elder is a giant tree man who sprouts roots and vines at you, which perfectly describes the large foreboding forest he can be found within. Unlike the Meadows, the Black Forest is there to give the player a little bit more of a difficulty curve, to start teaching them that things are more difficult to fight than greylings and grey dwarfs. The Elder is that gatekeep to the difficulty of the game, in which we enter the next area, which is the swamp. Inside the swamp you fight bonemass, which is, well, a massive sludge, slime, and bones that deals insane amount of poison damage and will easily kill the unprepared, which perfectly describes the swamp biome. This goes on for the rest of the bosses, even including the final boss, although in my opinion his design doesn't perfectly fit the biome he's in, yet they may change it in the future. This game is nearly perfect, and to top it off, the game is only halfway done, with biomes, bosses, armor sets, enemies, and a whole lot more to be added in the future. The fact that this game feels like a finished product when it isn't even done shows just how wild of a ride the future of this game just may be. It does have its issues, like the stamina bar being more annoying than engaging, bows being pretty much broken, and needing to have a workstation wherever you build can be an annoyance, but you get used to it. The minor problems are greatly outweighed with the wonder that this game is. I cannot say it enough. This game is perfect. Go, purchase this game, full price, sale, whatever. Get the game, get a few friends, and engage in a Nordic adventure you'll never forget. If you got this far, you probably enjoyed what you watched. I put a lot of time into these, and any support would be appreciated. Feel free to subscribe, comment down below, and hit that bell to be notified whenever I upload. I'm somewhat active on Twitter, so if you want to hear more from me or what I'm up to, go follow me there. It's somewhere in the description.